I'm going to attempt something ridiculous today, make a game within 101 lines of code in Unity. But hold up, I've got a loophole. Helper libraries don't count as gameplay code. Only the gameplay itself matters. The game also has to be a little challenging, not something as simple as Flappy Bird. Plus, the code must be readable because, let's face it, I could just inline everything into one unreadable line and technically call it a game. But that would be boring and cheating. Now a little disclaimer before we dive in. Ignore my code style. Pretend you didn't see the lack of optimization or the weird borderline chaotic solutions. The goal is 101 lines of readable gameplay code. Let's go. First things first, let's prepare the project. The first script I'll create is for the base, our tower. It will have some fancy properties like health, damage, fire rate and projectile count. For visuals, our tower will just be a humble square plopped in the center of the screen. Now to save lines, all gameplay data will live inside JSON files. JSON is my secret weapon here because it can save me a ton of code. So I imported a library for handling JSON files and got to work. I created a JSON file for the base that includes its stats and upgrades options. On each level, we'll be able to upgrade the base properties using two methods. Add a fixed value or increase by a percentage. Once I read all this data in C#, I went from 4 lines of property declarations down to 1. Efficiency, baby! Now this wasn't exactly smooth sailing. I needed to update properties every X seconds, but using Unity's update method or custom coroutines felt like overkill. So I cheated a little and imported a helper script that handles timed events. Every time the base upgrades, it updates timers based on the new properties. But guess what? The timer script still needs to be updated in Unity's update method. Final count is 28 lines. Moving on to the next challenge, spawning enemies. Enemies need to spawn around the base in waves, and each wave needs its own data in. The JSON file defines things like how many enemies spawn, their health and the XP they drop when destroyed. I followed the same logic at the base script and used my event timer to handle wave spawns. I saved a few lines by using this timer to control spawn times. I also wrote a spawn method that instantiates enemies by their prefab names. Now let's talk enemies. In the enemy script I wrote an update method that checks the distance between the enemy and the base. If the enemy gets close enough, it damages the base and self-destructs. No colliders, because who needs them when you're trying to save lines? Sure, it's a bit hacky, but it worked the same way with fewer lines. The base needed to defend itself, so I created a bullet script. Using Unity's onTriggerEnter, the bullet checks if it collides with an enemy. Later I renamed this script to Projectile because bullet sounded too basic. After tweaking some scripts, I tested everything and surprise, motherfucker, nothing worked. But after a quick debugging session, I fixed it. Enemies now spawn, move toward the base, and eventually destroy it. At this point, I had 105 lines of gameplay code, and the game wasn't even finished. So I started optimizing. I inlined some library calls and shaved it down to 96 lines. Progress, but then I realized I still need a UI. And UI in 5 lines? Now that's a challenge. Just declaring a new class and method would eat up all my remaining lines, so I started aggressively inlining fields. Somehow it was still readable. Finally, I created a game manager script to handle everything else. Why not split it into multiple scripts? Because that would add to the line count, and I was already on thin ice. Inside the projectile script I added XP-based leveling. The UI for upgrades was simple, but I hit a roadblock. Upgrades in the JSON files could modify multiple properties at once, and that wasn't working well. I had to rewrite everything so players could choose which property to upgrade. After more tweaking, the system worked, and the game was finally playable. To make it look better, I added some sprites. Sure, it's still not the prettiest game, but it works. Now came the final boss, line count reduction. I replaced duplicate methods for destroying objects with a single global destroy method. I also realized Unity already has a built-in destroy method with a delay parameter, so I scrapped my custom solution. Additionally, instead of caching the base instance, I decided to look it up each time to save a line or two. Okay, so the final is 22 lines plus 17 lines plus 16 lines plus 19 lines plus 27 lines plus, and yeah, 101 lines. I did it! The gameplay fits within the limit. Sure, I used a library and a helper script, but the gameplay itself is 101 lines. This isn't even a simple game. Either it has a tower with upgradable properties, JSON-based configurations, a spawner, and enemies that work together. What kind of game could we create? Thanks for watching, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments how you'd squeeze more functionality into 101 lines. See you next time, bye bye!